And you have been listening to Donald Trump at his Mar-a-Lago resort giving a news conference with reporters there. And I'm just going to summarize what the former president, the Republican nominee for president in this 2024 election, had to say, and then we'll get into it. But this is a summary of what he had to say, referring to Kamala Harris as a radical left person and that she picked a radical left man, referring to her vice presidential pick, Tim Walz, saying that he is heavy into the transgender world, that he doesn't want to have borders, saying the United States is a very sick country, and we saw the stock market crash last week. It's going to get a lot worse. Also saying that the October 7th attacks, referring to the Hamas attacks on Israel and Russia's war in Ukraine, wouldn't have happened had Donald Trump had won the 2020 election and had been president. Also saying there that Donald Trump and the team have agreed to 3 debates with Kamala Harris on Fox on September 4th, on NBC on September 10th, on ABC on September 25th, but saying that Harris would have to agree to this, saying that a couple of other little things, that we could be in the throes of a depression, and then talking about crowd sizes, something that Donald Trump has disputed, has talked about, and saying that he gets 10 to 20, 30 times the crowd sizes that Kamala Harris has gotten, and then also criticizing her for not doing a news conference like he just did, saying that she's not doing a news conference because she's not smart enough, and that we are in a great danger of being in World War III. Lots to cover there. Journalist Benji Heyer joins us now live from Washington. So that was Trump's first public appearance since Harris named her Democratic vice presidential running mate. A lot to get in there, Benji, but, what kind of stood out for you?
I think that the sort of language, the rhetoric, the claims that we heard from Donald Trump are hardly surprising. This is sort of his textbook campaign sort of language that he has been using, not just in this presidential race, but the last 2, branding Joe Biden as weak, saying that Kamala Harris did not receive the votes to become the candidate. Of course, she was just the successor to Joe Biden, taking all of his delegates almost automatically, and saying that she's part of the radical left, that she's worse than the current president. I think that there were also a huge amount of allegations thrown out there, which people watching and listening might not know the context of all of them. So he referred to Kamala Harris's running mate, Tim Walz, as someone who's dangerously liberal, someone, as you say, who doesn't want to have borders. Now, this is a reference to the fact that the Minnesota governor supported a pathway to citizenship for dreamers, those undocumented immigrants who arrived in the United States as children. He also said, and he repeated this line a lot in past weeks and months, that there are people coming out of mental institutions across the border. Now, I've watched a lot of Trump addresses here, and what I read from this is there clearly is some sort of confusion between asylum seekers, those who want to come into the country to seek refuge, and people from insane asylums. That there's this weird confusion, correlation that Donald Trump seems to put out there, either intentionally or accidentally, to those reporters and those who are viewing this news conference. He claimed that he's leading in polls as well. Again, I think it depends which polls you look at. And as you mentioned, claims that the conflicts we've seen erupt in Ukraine and Gaza wouldn't have happened. He said off the back of that millions of dead people the millions of deaths have been caused by those wars. Again, a statistic that's not backed up with any verifiable facts. What this did do ultimately, I think, Andrew, though, is do what he wanted, which is create this split screen, right, between him standing there at a news conference, answering questions, even if he littered his responses with falsities, and contrast that with Kamala Harris, who he says is barely competent, who hasn't sat down for an interview or done a news conference. It steals back the limelight. I mean, we're talking about him now instead of her campaign. But also a major takeaway, I think, is the contrast in terms of the tone and the framing of this campaign. You have Donald Trump, who calls America a, quote, sick country, who says that if Kamala Harris wins, it will be a giant failure, that there'll be World War III. That fear, that negativity, that's clearly a tactic. Contrast that with frankly, the hope and the optimism that we've seen espoused from Kamala Harris and her running mate as they've hit the campaign trail in the past few days.
And Benji, I know we only have a few seconds left, but just one more in terms of the crowd sizes, because this is something that we heard Donald Trump, you've been to rallies, for him to say he has 10 to 20 to 30 times the crowd sizes that Kamala Harris says, that's just not the case.
It's not the case at all. Look, Trump has enormous enthusiasm behind him. His base has been consistently supportive since 2016. I think in 2016 there were huge numbers that have turned up, but we've seen Donald Trump and his running mate J.D. Vance go to the same cities, in fact, in some cases the same arenas specifically as Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, and they have pulled in dramatically fewer people than we've seen the Democrats. Now, of course, enthusiasm goes in waves. That could switch back the other way. But, I mean, these are just plain falsities put out by the president when it comes to crowd sizes and statistics. Frankly, nothing new from a man who immediately after winning the presidency said that he had the biggest inauguration crowd in history.
Which was also not true. All right, Benji, thank you. The journalist Benji Heyer reporting live from Washington. Thank you. Let's bring in Cynthia Tucker now. She was listening along with us, and she is a Pulitzer Prize-winning political columnist and journalist in residence at the University of South Alabama in Mobile. And Cynthia, thank you very much for taking the time. Appreciate you being there for us. So.
Thank you for having me.
I think I just want to kind of ask you, this is a news conference that Donald Trump just had. What stood out for you in terms of what he had to say, the allegations or the claims that he made in that news conference specifically?
Well, first, I think I need to give Donald Trump credit for actually holding a news conference. It does set up a contrast with Kamala Harris and her running mate, Tim Walz, who have not yet held news conferences. I'm sure they will. There's a clamor from the press for them to do so, and I'm sure they'll get to that. The other thing is that I will have to say that it is clear that the Trump campaign aides have been trying to find a way to get Trump back on message, to talk about Harris in terms of policy, and not just about her race. She's not really black. She turned black recently, as he told a black journalist convention in Chicago not long ago. So he did hit what will clearly be the high points of his campaign as far as policy contrasts go. He talked about inflation, which is a big worry for American voters. He talked about immigration. However, he could not help but lapse into being Donald Trump. He whined about press coverage of crowd sizes. That's a big deal for him. The man is a pathological narcissist who craves attention. It really upsets him to see the crowds that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz have been drawing. Another thing that stood out for me is what he said about his relationship with the governor of Georgia. Having worked in Atlanta for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution for many, many years, I know exactly what that was about. Trump lost Georgia. He compared it to Alabama and Mississippi, but those are different states. Georgia has been increasingly turning purple. Not purple yet, but it has two Democratic senators. Neither Alabama nor Mississippi have that. So Trump lost Georgia by nearly 12,000 votes. He didn't get over that, still hasn't. But the Brian Kemp, the Republican governor of Georgia, would not go along with Trump's claim that the Georgia election was fraudulent. And Trump is still angry with him about that. So he holds grudges. He still holds that grudge. And his attack on a popular Republican governor in a state he needs to win might hurt him.
Cynthia, I want to get back to something that you mentioned at the beginning because, you know, I work in the media, so I don't want to kind of be in a media bubble. But since you brought it up, and Donald Trump has brought it up, and Republicans have brought it up, this idea of this news conference saying that she can't do an interview, she's barely competent, and saying she's not going to do a news conference because she's not smart enough. What do you make of the fact that since she has become the presumptive nominee, Kamala Harris has not done a news conference, has not done an interview, and is that something that should be something we talk about?
Yes, I do think she needs to do a news conference. I will say what I think her campaign is thinking. I think her campaign is thinking that she needed to take time to introduce herself as the Democratic nominee for president and to introduce her running mate, whom she only chose over last weekend. I think her campaign thinks there's plenty of time for news conferences later. First, let's do this big rollout and show the energy and enthusiasm that we have. And they have done that. They have shown huge crowds, energy, enthusiasm. They've introduced Tim Walz as the running mate. So now that they have done all that, I do think she needs to do a news conference. Now, let's talk about Trump's criticisms. Mm-hmm. Let's be clear that his racism and his misogyny show up here. Mm-hmm. He keeps talking about the fact that she didn't pass the bar exam. Well, she could never have been Attorney General of California if she had not passed the bar exam. If she's not smart enough to have a news conference, why has he changed the terms of the debates? He has already said that he's not going to do the first debate that was scheduled. The second, I'm sorry, he's done one debate that he and Joe Biden decided on. But then he changed the terms. He would only do a debate on Fox News. Well, you know, Kamala Harris has said no to that, and I don't blame her, since Fox News can hardly be considered a legitimate news organization.
Well,
it's
Cynthia,
MAGA dominated.
Yeah, Cynthia, Trump says that he has agreed with Fox to do a debate on September 4th, agreed with NBC to do a debate on September 10th, and agreed with ABC to do a debate on September 25th, and that CBS will do the vice presidential debate. I don't think that there was a date for that, but that the Harris team would have to agree to the terms. So what do you make of that?
Well, if in fact he is now talking about debates on legitimate legacy news channels, I am sure that that is something the Harris-Walz campaign will consider. But you know, here in the U.S., we have a commission on presidential debates that's supposed to handle these things. The first debate between Trump and Biden, the one in which Biden fared so poorly, was outside of that. And one of the reasons the Commission on Presidential Debates is important is because they set certain ground rules. But if Harris's campaign can come to terms with the debates that Trump talks about on the dates they want, and the ground rules can be set, I am sure she will do those.
Cynthia, it was a real pleasure to talk to you. I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. Thank you.